Good morning, everyone. Uh, the previous session we started discussing production theory, and we discussed basic concepts related to short-run production. In short run, we have at least one short run. At least we should have one fixed input. Thank you. In the short run, a firm should operate with at least one variable input. So as we discussed in the previous session, we consider labor as the variable input. Sorry. There should be at least one fixed input. There should be at least one fixed input. And we simplify our discussion with only two variables, labor and capital. This is only for the simplicity. And we consider capital as the fixed input. We consider capital as the fixed input. So whatever the level of output, capital input is given. Capital input is given. The amount of capital is given. So that is the nature of short-run production. And we discuss short-run production curves, the behavior of short-run production curves. And then we discuss the stages of production in the short run. There are 3 stages of production in the short run: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Stage 1 starts from 0 level of production. Stage 1 starts from 0 level of production. And it ends where average product of labor is maximum. At the same point, we see another characteristic. At the same point, average product of labor equals to marginal product of labor. So stage 1 starts from the origin where output is 0, and it ends where APL is maximum, or in other words, APL and NPL are equal. And stage 2 starts from this point where APL is maximum and where APL and NPL are equal. And it ends at the point where NPL is 0, where NPL is 0. And in stage 3, it starts from the point where NPL is 0, and it continues over the range where NPL is negative. So that is how we understand, that is how we identify 3 stages of production in the short run. We discussed this in detail in the previous session. And today we start our discussion with the concept of law of diminishing marginal returns. Law of diminishing marginal returns. This is a law related to the short run production period. This is the law related to the short run production period. But this theory says is when a firm uses more and more units of the variable input. When a firm uses more and more units of the variable input. So in our case, the variable input is labor. In our context, variable input is labor. So when a firm increases its labor input, from one unit and another unit likewise, what happens is when the firm increases its labor input with a given amount of fixed input, given amount means the amount of fixed input is it's constant, it's fixed. Labor input is increasing, but the unit of fixed input, which is capital, it remains unchanged. It remains at the same level. For example, let's say the firm is utilizing 100 units of capital. It doesn't change. It never increase or decrease. So when a firm increases its variable input with a given level of fixed input, there is one point after which marginal product from the variable input, in our case, the variable input is labor. So marginal product of variable input is marginal product of labor. When a firm increases its labor, input with a given amount of capital input, there is one particular point after which marginal product of labor diminishing. Marginal product of labor is diminishing. That means marginal product of labor is decreasing. When a firm increases its labor input with a fixed amount of capital input, labor inputs are increasing. Labor units are increasing. What happens is when the firm increases labor input beyond the capacity of capital, what happens is there is an abundant level of labor. There is more labor inputs compared to capital input. Because of this labor abundance, marginal product of labor starts to decline. That means one additional unit of labor produces a declining amount of additional output. Declining amount of additional output. For example, let's think about a garment factory. Let's say the garment factory has 10 machines. So it has this amount of capital, 10 machines. With 10 machines can be utilized at the best capacity with only 10 workers, 10 laborers. So this amount of labor is within the capacity of capital. It is in line with the capacity of the capital. But when the firm hires more than 10 laborers, what happens is there is only limited number of machines, but there is an excess amount of labor. So excess amount of labor will produce declining amount of additional output. That is what this theory says. Labor becomes underutilized. There are no enough machines to utilize excess labor. Labor becomes underutilized. There is no sufficient amount of capital to utilize this excess labor. As a result, what happens is one additional unit of labor will produce a declining amount of additional output. So to summarize it again, to generalize, I will use the terms variable input and fixed input. Rather than saying capital and labor, I will call it labor input, variable input and fixed input, because labor is not the only variable input, capital is not the only fixed input. There may be some other variable input, there may be some other capital input. So to generalize this concept, I'm saying that when a firm is increasing its variable input with a given amount of fixed input, there is one particular point after which marginal product of the variable input starts to decline. After which marginal product of the variable input starts to decline. So when we show that law of diminishing marginal returns in the production curves, it is over here. You can see this is the maximum point of, sorry. This is the maximum point of marginal product of labor. This is the marginal product curve. This is the marginal product of labor curve. The maximum of marginal product of labor is here. Maximum level of marginal product of labor is here. So at this level of labor, marginal product of labor is maximum. After reaching the maximum level of marginal product of labor, you observe one thing. What is it? Marginal product of labor starts to decline. Marginal product of labor starts to decline. So that is where the law of diminishing marginal returns occur. This is the region where the law of diminishing marginal returns occur. What is the meaning of law of diminishing marginal returns? When a firm increases its variable input, with a given amount of a fixed input, there is one particular point after which marginal product of the variable input starts to decline. So marginal product of the variable input, in our case, it's marginal product of labor. So over this range, you observe marginal product of labor is declining. So that is where law of diminishing marginal returns exist. That is the region, that is the range of labor where law of diminishing marginal return occurs. So with numbers, if I show the same thing with numbers, it's over here. Marginal product of labor quantities are there. So you can see the maximum marginal product of labor is at this level. The maximum level of marginal product of labor is here. At this range of labor. At this range of labor. So after increasing labor input, so if we saw the capital input, let's say I establish a separate column here to show the fixed input, that is capital. Capital input is the same. It doesn't change. If it is 50, at every level of labor, that will be 50. Here I assume it's 100. So whatever the level of labor, capital input remains unchanged. So when a firm increases its labor input, yes, it happens. Labor input is increasing from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Likewise, labor input is increasing. That is the variable input. With a given amount of the fixed input, which is capital. Yes, capital input is given. Given means it's fixed. When a firm increases its variable input with a given level of fixed input, there is one particular point after which marginal product of labor starts to decline. You can see marginal product of labor is declining after reaching its maximum level. So this is the region where the law of diminishing marginal returns occur. To repeat my example again, when there is a garment factory employing 10 machines, they can optimally utilize 10 machines with only 10 workers, 10 operators. When the firm hires more than 10 operators, what happens is additional input, additional amount of garment items produced by additional worker will start to decline because there is an excess of labor with a limited amount, with a given amount of capital. So that what happens is an additional labor, an additional worker, an additional machine operator will produce a declining amount of additional output. So these are additional outputs. These are additional outputs. Additional outputs produced by one additional labor. That is the meaning of marginal product of labor. So capital is underutilized. There is an abundant level of labor. Hope you got the idea of flow of diminishing marginal returns. Don't compare these numbers, okay, with my example. Sometimes this can be machine hours. This can be machine hours. We can measure capital in different ways. Sometimes this can be number of machines. Sometimes we can measure capital as number of machine hours. Sometimes we can measure it as, let's say, yes, those are two optional ways to measure capital. So don't confuse with these numbers that we have many capital items, but we have only a very low level of labor. That is not the case. There is a level of capital after which labor is excess. There is an excess labor. So this level over this range, labor is excess. There is an excess of labor. That means comparatively, labor input is larger than capital. That is why MPL is declining. That is why MPL is declining over this range. Clear? Any questions? So there is a limit of output that can be produced in a production facility of a given size and technology. So assume we have located 10 machines in this area. We can productively produce garment items only with 10 machine operators. And assume a situation where we have 50 or 60 machine operators working in this area, working in this space, only with 10 machines. So is it productive? No, it's not productive. So there is a limit of given facility, production facility. Capital is limited, but labor is overcrowded. Labor is overcrowded. So there may be some disturbances by one person to others' works. There may be disturbances. As a result, what happens is marginal product of labor declines. As a result, marginal product of labor declines. That is what we say by law of diminishing marginal return. The declining portion of MPL curve shows the law of diminishing marginal return. That's what we saw in previous slides. The declining portion of marginal product is where this law occurs. Okay, that is about law of diminishing marginal returns. And in the previous session, I told you that a rational producer rational producer who wants to maximize profits will operate in the second stage of production. In the second stage of production. So the production point will occur somewhere in stage 2. Production point will occur somewhere in stage 2. So let's see how a rational producer decides this level of production. How a rational producer decides this level of production. Still we don't know where this rational producer will operate at. We only know that whatever the level, that level will be within stage 2. That is the only information we know from theory. Now we are going to find exactly at what level this rational producer will operate. That is our next task. So the level of production is indicated by the level of labor. The level of labor. So we will find the level of labor at which a rational producer will operate. The level of labor at which a rational producer will operate. In other words, the level of labor a rational producer will use the optimum level of labor. The optimum level of labor. It is the optimum level of labor. The rational producer will use. That is where the rational producer operates. That is what we are going to see next. The optimum level of labor. Do we have to decide the optimum level of capital also? What do you think? Do we have to decide the optimum level of capital? No, because capital is always fixed. In my example, capital is always fixed at 100. So there is no need of deciding the optimum level of capital. It's already given. It's already available. In my garment factory example, there are 10 machines. So they are already given. They are already provided. So there is no need of deciding an optimum level of capital. So let's see how to decide the optimum level of labor at which a rational producer will operate. With regard to any economic actor, the optimum decision should be made. An optimum decision should be made comparing two things. What are they? Marginal benefit and marginal cost. Any economic actor makes the optimum decisions by comparing marginal benefits and marginal costs. And the optimum decision will be reached when the optimum decision will be made when marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost. Optimum decision will be made at a point where marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost. Marginal benefit means additional benefit. Marginal cost means additional cost. So here also, to decide the optimum use of variable input. In our case, the variable input is labor. In our case, the variable input is labor. So we will discuss this optimum use of variable input regarding labor, but we can generalize this same concept to any other variable input as well. So there may be some other variable inputs like raw material. There may be some other variable inputs like electricity. Likewise, there may be some other types of variable inputs. Whatever the variable input, you have to follow the same logic. You have to follow the same logic. We will explain the logic in relation to labor only, but you can generalize the same logic to any other variable inputs. So let's see how a rational producer will decide its optimum use of optimum use of variable input in the short run. The producer has to compare marginal benefit and marginal cost. Marginal benefit of an additional labor unit. Marginal cost of an additional labor unit. Those are the two things that a rational producer should compare in order to find the optimum level of labor unit. What are they? Marginal benefit of an additional labor unit and marginal cost of an additional labor unit. At the optimum level of the variable input, labor, marginal benefit of labor should be equal to marginal cost of labor. At the optimum use of, or at the optimum level of labor, marginal benefit of labor should be equal to marginal cost of labor. Marginal benefit of labor means additional benefit that the firm gains by employing one additional unit of labor. The additional amount of benefit the firm gains by utilizing one additional unit of labor. By using labor, what the firm does? Utilizing labor, firm utilizes labor in order to produce. Why a firm produces output? To sell them. And earn an income. So additional revenue becomes the marginal benefit. Additional revenue becomes the marginal benefit. Additional or marginal revenue becomes the marginal benefit. Firms utilize labor in order to produce. Firms produce output in order to sell them and earn revenue. So the benefit of labor is what? The revenue. Benefit of employing labor is revenue. So the marginal benefit of employing an additional unit of labor is the additional or marginal revenue a firm can earn by utilizing one additional unit of labor. The marginal benefit to the firm of employing one additional unit of labor is additional or marginal revenue a firm can earn by employing one additional unit of labor. Marginal benefit of labor is additional or marginal revenue that the firm can earn by employing one additional unit of labor. That is about the marginal benefit part. It's about the marginal benefit part. Technically, we call it marginal revenue product of labor. The additional revenue the firm can earn by employing one additional unit of labor technically called marginal product of labor. Marginal product of labor. That is the technical term we give to additional or marginal revenue that the firm can earn by employing one additional unit of labor. That is nothing else. Change in total revenue divided by change in labor. Change in total revenue divided by change in labor. The same thing, additional or marginal revenue that the firm can earn by employing one additional unit. We measure it using change in total revenue divided by change in labor input. This is the formula. So this is the basic formula for marginal revenue product of labor. In abbreviation, we call it MRPL. MRPL. That is MRPL. MRPL stands for marginal revenue product of labor. What is it? Additional or marginal revenue that the firm can earn by employing one additional unit of labor. How do we measure it? How do we measure it? Using a basic formula, that is change in total revenue divided by change in labor. Specifically, we can measure it. This is the general formula. This is the normal formula we can use. Specifically, we can measure it in this marginal product of labor multiplied by marginal revenue. This is the general formula. This is more specific. The same thing, but in different ways. This is very general. This is very general. This is more specific. The same thing, okay, they are equal. Change in total revenue divided by change in L, we can measure as MPL into MR. MPL into MR. That is what? Marginal revenue product of labor. What is the meaning of marginal revenue product of labor? That is the additional revenue that the firm can gain, that the firm can earn by employing one additional unit of labor. That is about marginal benefit part. Marginal benefit part. And what about MCL, marginal cost of labor? Marginal cost of labor is technically called marginal resource cost of labor. Marginal resource cost of labor. Marginal cost of labor is technically called marginal resource cost of labor. That is the additional cost additional cost that the firm has to incur as a result of employing one additional labor, one additional unit of labor. Is the additional cost that the firm has to incur as a result of employing one additional unit of labor. That is marginal resource cost of labor. Generally, we measure it as change in total cost divided by change in L. Change in total cost divided by change in L. Additional cost that the firm has to incur as a result of employing one additional unit of labor. That is change in TC divided by change in L. This is equal to the wage rate. This is equal to the wage rate. If the wage rate is 10, to hire an additional labor input, we have to pay an additional 10 rupees. If the wage rate is 10 for one laborer, to increase labor input by one laborer, we have to pay an additional 10 rupees. That is why marginal resource cost, which is delta TC over delta L, equals to the wage rate. Is the wage rate. So as I told you earlier, for any economic actor to decide an optimum decision, the basic principle is marginal benefit should be equal to marginal cost. Marginal benefit should be equal to marginal cost. So in this case, the producer wants to decide the maximum level of variable input, maximum level of labor input. So how it is done? It is done by comparing, by equating marginal revenue product of labor, which is the marginal benefit. In this case, this should be equal to marginal resource cost of labor, which is the marginal cost in this case. So the optimum level of labor, is decided where marginal revenue product of labor equals to marginal resource cost of labor. Optimum use of the labor input or optimum level of labor input is determined at determine where marginal revenue product of labor is equal to marginal resource cost of labor. Optimum use of labor is decided where marginal revenue product of labor equals to marginal resource cost. But in the formula to calculate marginal revenue product of labor, it's MPL into MR. What is MRCL? That is the wage rate. So at the optimum level of labor, MPL into MR. MPL into MR should be equal to wage rate, should be equal to W. This is the condition. This is the formula. So if someone asks how does a rational producer decide its labor input in the short run, this is the condition. Marginal revenue product of labor should be equal to marginal resource of cost of labor. How to find it? We find it with this equality. MPL into MRA should be equal to the wage rate. So let's see how it happens graphically. We learned marginal product of labor is declining. Marginal product of labor is declining according to the law of diminishing marginal returns. Law of diminishing marginal returns occur over this range. Over this range. And also we learned that a rational producer will produce in stage 2. Rational producer will produce in stage 2. And where we have stage 2 of production, stage 2 of production starts. Stage 2 of production starts from the point where APL is maximum. And it ends at the point where MPL is 0. So this is the second stage. This is the second stage where a rational producer will operate. So over this range of stage 2, how MPL behaves? How does MPL behaves? MPL is declining. MPL is declining. You see, MPL is declining over the range where stage 2 exists. Stage 2 of production exists. So within stage 2, what do you observe related to MPL? MPL is declining. That is why we have taken declining part of MPL. MPL is declining. MPL is declining. And to decide the optimum use of variable input, the condition is marginal revenue product of labor should be equal to marginal resource cost of labor. To find marginal revenue product of labor, we have to multiply marginal product of labor by marginal revenue. And marginal revenue is nothing else. Marginal revenue, I forgot to mention it before. Marginal revenue is price of output. That is the price of output. Marginal revenue is price of output. Price of output is fixed. Like wage rate is also fixed. Wage rate is also fixed. If it is decided at 10 rupees, for any number of labor, one laborer will be paid 10 rupees. That is the same for price of output also. Whatever the level of production, whatever the level of sales, 1 unit of output will cost the same, will be priced the same. That is fixed. So marginal revenue is price of output. That is the extra price we get by selling one additional unit of output. That is why we call it marginal revenue. Marginal revenue. Extra revenue that the firm can earn by selling one additional unit of output. So, marginal revenue product of labor is MPL into marginal revenue. To make it more specific, it is marginal product of labor into price of output should be equal to the wage rate. Marginal product of labor, what is its behavior? It's declining. It's declining. A declining curve multiplied by a fixed number. A declining curve multiplied by a fixed number. Then it should, this is marginal product of labor. The marginal product, revenue product of labor curve will be here. This is marginal product of labor. This is marginal revenue product of labor. After multiplying MPL by price of output. That is why we have a downward sloping marginal revenue product curve. Marginal product of labor is declining as we observed in the graph because a rational producer is operating in stage 2. The optimum use of labor input is decided where marginal revenue product of labor equals to marginal resource cost of labor. To find marginal revenue product of labor, we have to multiply marginal product by the price level. Price level is fixed. So marginal product of labor is declining. When we multiply these declining numbers by a fixed number, the curve shifts to the right. The curve should shift to the right with the same slope. The slope is the same, but it shifts to the right after multiplying by a fixed number. So after multiplying MPL by the price, this is marginal revenue product curve. This is marginal revenue product curve. To decide the optimum use of labor, marginal revenue product of labor, which is the multiplication of MPL into price of output, should be equal to the wage rate. Like the price, wage rate is also fixed. So this is the wage rate. This is the wage rate, which is marginal revenue cost of labor. Marginal revenue cost of labor. So the optimum level of labor is decided where marginal revenue product of labor is equal to marginal resource cost of labor. This curve is for marginal revenue product of labor. This horizontal curve is for marginal resource cost of labor. Marginal revenue product of labor and marginal resource cost of labor are equal. These two values are equal at this intersecting point. So this is where marginal revenue product of labor is equal to marginal resource cost of labor. And this point corresponds to this much of labor input, this much of labor input. So that is the optimum level of labor. That is the optimum level of labor. L star. We can call it L star to denote that it is the optimum level of labor, the optimum use of labor. So a rational producer will utilize 3.5 units of labor according to this graph. A rational producer will utilize 3.5 units of labor as the optimum level of labor, and it is decided where MPL equals to MRCL, MRPL equals to MRCL. So this 3.5 is only for this diagram, okay? So when we have different numbers for MPL and when we have different numbers for price of output, when we have different numbers for the wage rate, this value will be different. The optimum amount of labor will be different. To decide the optimum use or to decide the optimum level of labor, the condition is this: MRPL equals to MRCL. This is MRPL curve, which is downward sloping. It is downward sloping because of what? It is downward sloping because MPL is downward sloping. It is downward sloping because MPL is downward sloping. MRPL is the multiplication of MPL by the price. MPL into price of output. Price of output. So since MPL curve is downward sloping, when we multiply this MPL values by the fixed price, MPL curve will shift to the right, and that will become marginal revenue product of labor. And that curve is shown here. That curve is shown there. So we have a downward sloping marginal revenue product of labor curve because it's downward sloping because MPL is downward sloping in stage 2. In stage 2. And we have a fixed value of wage rate, that is marginal resource cost of labor, and the optimum use of one variable input, marginal revenue product of labor should be equal to marginal resource cost of labor, and that is found at this intersecting point. And this intersecting point corresponds to this much of labor, and that is L star, which is the optimum level of labor. Is the optimum level of labor. Why it is optimum? Why do we call it the optimum level of labor? That is what next we are going to understand. Is this clear for you? Any questions? So at the optimum level of labor, marginal revenue product of labor should be equal to marginal resource cost of labor. That is where this intersecting point occurs. Before this intersecting point, where MRPL equals to MRCL, before that point, what do we observe? What do we observe? Marginal revenue product of labor is greater than marginal resource cost of labor. So over this range, marginal revenue product of labor is greater than marginal resource cost of labor. And after this intersecting point, where MRPL equals to MRCL, what do we observe? Marginal revenue product of labor is lower than marginal resource cost of labor. Marginal revenue product of labor is lower than marginal resource cost of labor. MRPL is simply what? That is the marginal benefit. MRCL is simply what? Marginal cost. Over this range of labor input, what do we observe? Marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost. That means when we employ one additional unit of labor, its marginal benefit will be greater than its marginal cost. So if you are the producer, what is your decision in this case? Marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost. You want to increase your benefit. So you want to increase your marginal benefit. For that, what do you have to do? You have to employ more labor. You have to increase labor input. Over this range, your marginal benefit, which is calculated as marginal revenue product of labor, is greater than your marginal cost, which is marginal resource cost of labor. So to increase your benefit, you tend to increase your labor input. When labor input increases, what happens is marginal revenue product of labor starts to decline. So in this range, before this equilibrium point, before this optimum point, marginal revenue product of labor is greater than marginal resource cost of labor. Since your marginal benefit side is greater than the marginal cost side, naturally, the producer tends to increase its labor input in order to increase its marginal benefit. When the firm increases its labor input, what happens is marginal revenue product of labor tends to decline. It tends to decline and will reach this point eventually. The producer will reach this point eventually where L star level of labor is employed. And think about the other side, where marginal revenue product of labor is less than marginal resource cost of labor. Here, marginal benefit is less, marginal cost is higher. So marginal cost is higher means it is disadvantageous for this firm to increase labor. It is disadvantageous for this firm to increase labor. So when the firm increases labor, its marginal resource cost will also increase. The gap between marginal revenue product of labor and marginal resource cost of labor will increase. Therefore, what naturally happens is the firm decides to the firm decides to cut down its labor input. Firm decides to cut down its labor input because its marginal cost is higher than marginal benefit. So if a firm operates somewhere here, their marginal revenue product of labor is less than marginal resource cost of labor. Since its marginal cost is greater, naturally the firm tends to cut down its labor. Naturally, the firm tends to cut down its labor. So when firm cuts its labor input, what happens is marginal revenue product of labor tends to increase. Marginal revenue product of labor tends to increase. Tends to increase. And will reach this point. Will reach this point where MRPL equals MRCL. So if the firm is operating at this level, L star level, where MRPL equals to MRCL, is there any tendency for this firm to cut down or increase their labor input? No, there is no tendency for this firm to increase or decrease its labor input. It's already decided. The firm will not increase its labor input. Also, the firm will not decrease its labor input. Firm has come to the optimum level of labor. There is no tendency for the firm to increase or decrease labor input. That is why it is called the optimum level or the optimum use. That is why it's called the optimum use or the optimum level of labor. Before that point, firm tends to decline, firm tends to increase, firm tends to increase its labor input because marginal benefit of extra labor is greater than marginal cost of an extra labor. Beyond this point, what happens is firm tends to cut down its labor because marginal cost of additional labor input is greater than marginal benefit of an extra labor input. But at this point, labor is fixed. There is no tendency for the firm to decide to decline or increase labor input. That is the reason why we call it the optimum level. Clear? Any questions? So that idea is explained in this slide, the same idea. When MRPL is greater than MRCL, firm increases the production as the MRPL is higher than MRCL. The opposite happens when MRPL is less than MRCL. So let's calculate the optimum use of labor input numerically with a numerical example. You are given labor input, you are given total product of labor, that is output. Q output, and NPL is given for you, that is change in TPL divided by change in L. Marginal revenue product of labor is, marginal revenue or the price of output or price of product is 10. It is fixed. Is fixed. Marginal revenue product of labor is marginal product of labor multiplied by the price. You can see here we have multiplied marginal product of labor by the price level. 24 multiplied by 10 is 240. 48 multiplied by 10 is 480. 66 multiplied by 10 is 660. Likewise, we have obtained marginal revenue product of labor, which is MRPL, by multiplying MPL values by the price of output, And marginal resource cost of labor is the wage rate. Wage rate is fixed. Wage rate is also fixed. So where the optimum level of labor is found, marginal revenue product of labor should be equal to marginal resource cost of labor. So you see, marginal revenue product of labor, marginal resource cost of labor, which is the wage rate, is always 660. So marginal revenue product of labor becomes 660 at this level of labor. So the optimum level of labor is 8 units. That is L star. Optimum level of labor is 8 units. It is 8 units because that is the level of labor where marginal revenue product of labor is equal to marginal resource cost of labor. So in the examination, if you are given some basic details, and if you are asked to calculate optimum level of labor in the short run for this firm, you should be able to do a similar thing like this. Okay. So usually we will give, in the examination, you will be given these values. Given L will be given, TPL will be given, price of output will be given. That may be in the question, okay? In the question as a sentence, you will be given that the firm is selling its output at this price. So in the question, this may be mentioned. The wage rate also will be mentioned in the question as a sentence. So this will be given in a table. So then it's up to you to derive this whole table with your understanding. You can establish a separate column for NPL, and you can establish a separate column to show the price of output, and then you can calculate marginal product of labor. Then you can establish this column for the wage rate, and then find where MRPL equals to MRCL, and mark it as L star. That is what you have to do in the examination. This is 708. Yes. How we check? There is another level. Then how to decide? Which level is the optimal? Thank you for pointing out it. There is another level. At this level also, marginal revenue product of labor is equal to marginal resource cost of labor. So this also seems like the optimum level of labor. Can there be two optimum levels of labor? No, it's not possible. Then how to decide which is the correct level of optimum labor? We have to look at which labor level stage 2 will exist. Is this 3 units of labor belong to belongs to stage 2 of production? No. Why is it? Why is it? 3 units of labor does not belong to stage 2 because over this range you can see MPL is increasing. Over this range, MPL is increasing. After this level, MPL starts to decline. MPL is declining. So in stage 2, MPL is declining. As we learned from theory, rational producer will operate only in stage 2. So therefore, 8 is the optimum level of labor, not 3. Because 3 units of labor is located somewhere where MPL is increasing, which is not stage 2. Which is not stage 2. 8 units of labor is located somewhere MPL is declining, so no matter. 8 units of labor lies somewhere within stage 2. Therefore, optimum level of labor is determined at 8 units of labor. 8 units of labor input. That is critical. That is very important. Thank you for pointing out. I also didn't notice it. So in the examination, you can identify both these points, P and A, and give a rationale. Which level do you choose and why? So in the examination, you should choose 8 units of labor as the optimum level of labor and give the rationale that 3 units of labor is not coming under stage 2 because at 3 units of labor, MPL is increasing, but at 8 units of labor, MPL is declining. So that is where stage 2 lies. So a rational producer will operate in stage 2. Therefore, we choose 8 units as the optimum level of labor. That is the explanation you should give at the examination. Yeah. Okay. We finished our discussion on short-run theory of production. We come to the long-run theory of production. We can have 10 minutes break before starting. Come back to the class at 10:34, 35. Sorry, 9:35. Do you have another class after 12? No. Professor Amila is doing. This is the only class you have today. In the timetable, it mentions that you have another. No, we don't. That. It's cancelled. If it happens, does it start soon after this class? Or you don't have any lunch break? Lunch break, that is Professor Amila's class, right? The marketing field. We have classes only on Sundays. That's Saturdays also. You are in a tight schedule there. Okay, have the bed. Individual assignment record uploaded past physically individual assignment.
Oh.
Okay. Now we come to the part where we discuss long-run production theory. So far we assume at least one input should be fixed. At least one input should be fixed in the short run. The short run, at least one input is fixed. We assume labor is variable input, capital is fixed. When it comes to long run, all inputs become variable. The long run. All inputs are variable. The short-term production function was Q equals K fixed with variable labor. We have fixed amount of capital. This is the production function, the general production function for the short run. The long run, there is no any bar over capital or over labor. There is no any bar over capital or labor. That denotes that both capital and labor are variable. We can change the level of capital, we can change the level of labor in the long run. In the short run, we could only change the level of labor, not capital. Capital is fixed. Here also for simplicity, we assume a two variable case. We have only capital and labor. That doesn't mean that capital and labor are the only inputs. We can have different types of other inputs as well. Raw material, water, chemicals, water, electricity, others. Other variables can be part of the production function. But only for simplicity, we assume there are only two inputs, capital and labor. This production function shows the maximum rate or maximum level. Maximum rate or maximum level of output obtained from given combination of capital and labor. Combination of capital and labor. There may be different combinations, K and K. With zero amount of capital, we can combine 10 units of labor. With 1 unit of capital, we can utilize, let's say, 9 units of labor. With 2 units of capital, we can combine, let's say, 8 units of labor. Likewise, there may be different combinations of labor and capital. The production function shows the maximum level of output. Maximum level of output that can be produced using different combinations, of labor and capital. Both labor and capital are variable. Maximum level of output means the producer is operating with technical efficiency. Technical efficiency is there. There is no wastage. Labor is fully utilized, capital is fully utilized. So the firm is generating, firm is producing the maximum level of output. Maximum level of output. By satisfying the technical efficiency. Technical efficiency means there is no wastage. With the given level of inputs, the firm produces the maximum amount of output. A firm faces with the problem of efficient allocation of resources in production. How to produce the level of output that maximizes profit. So here also, the firm's objective is profit maximization. Here also the firm's objective is profit maximization. To maximize profit, firm should decide profit maximizing output level. Profit maximizing output level. To produce profit maximizing output level, firm should decide how much of labor should be utilized and how much of capital should be utilized. In order to maximize profits, firm should decide the profit maximizing output level. Firm should decide the profit maximizing output level. To decide the profit maximizing output level, firm should decide how much to utilize from labor, how much to utilize from capital. Firm should decide optimum level of labor, L star, and also optimum level of capital, K star. After deciding L star and K star, which are optimum levels of labor and capital, firm can decide how much to produce, and that should be the profit maximizing output level. So our target is to decide L star and K star in order to maximize profits. How to produce the level of output while maximizing profit, and that is decided by selecting L star and K star units. So take that care. That is what we are going to do. So this picture, this table shows different combinations of capital and labor. So this is 1 unit of capital, this is 2 units of capital, this is 3 units of capital, 4 units of capital, 5 units of capital, 6 units of capital. Likewise, we have 1 unit of labor, 2 units of labor, 3 units of labor, 4 units of labor, 5 units of labor, 6 units of labor. This is amount of labor. This is amounts of capital. And these values are possible for maximum amount of output. Maximum amount of output that this firm can produce with these combinations of labor and capital. That this firm can produce by combining different capital and labor units. These values are the maximum amounts of output that this firm can produce by combining different levels of capital and different levels of labor. For example, if this firm combines 5 units of capital and 4 units of labor, how much they can produce? How much of an output they can produce? 40 units. They can produce 40 units of power. If they utilize 2 units of labor and 3 units of capital, how much they can produce? 23 units of output. 23 units of output. If they combine 4 units of capital and 5 units of labor, how much they can produce? 40 units of output. If they utilize 6 units of capital with 6 units of labor, they can produce 39 units of output. Likewise, these values are the levels of output that can produce by utilizing different levels of labor and capital. Different levels of labor and capital. You can see there are some similar numbers. The same number appears in different combinations. Do you observe it? The same number is there. The same level of output is there in different locations. That means at different combinations of output inputs. For example, this firm can produce 36 units of output by combining 6 K units and 4 L units. Similarly, the firm can produce 36 units of output by combining 5 units of K and 3 units of L. Again, the firm can produce 36 units of output by combining 4 units of K and 3 units of L. Again, firm can produce 36 units of output by combining 3 units of K and 4 units of L. Next, firm can produce 36 units of output by combining 3 units of K and 5 units of L. Moreover, the firm can produce 36 units of output by combining 4 units of K and 6 units of L. You see, the same level of output can be generated, can be produced by combining different combinations of capital and labor. Different combinations of capital and labor. Same amount of output can be generated, can be produced by combining different combinations of capital and labor. So if I write capital here, capital input, labor input, number of output. Capital, labor, out. 6 units of capital, and 4 units of labor, output will be 30. 5 units of capital and 3 units of labor, output will be 30. 4 units of capital and 3 units of labor, output will be 30. 3 units of capital and 4 units of labor, output will be 30. 3 units of capital and 5 units of labor, output will be 36. 4 units of capital and 6 units of labor, output will be 36. The same level of output, but it can be produced by utilizing different combinations of capital and labor. These are alternative combinations. These are alternative combinations. The firm can produce 36 units of output either by combining 6K or 4L units. At the same time, they can produce 36 units of output by combining 3 units of K and 4 units of L. Or else, they can produce 36 units of output by combining 4 units of K and 6 units of L. Likewise, these are kind of alternative combinations of labor and capital which derive the same level of output. We can combine these levels using a smooth curve. A smooth curve. We can combine those, the same level of output, the similar levels of output using a smooth curve. This is a smooth curve. We drew the curve smoothly, not with rigid kings or we didn't draw it like this. It's not smooth. We draw it as a smooth curve. This kind of a curve is called an isopont curve. This kind of a curve is called isopont curve. Isopont curve. Iso means equal. Pont stands for the quantities. We have similar quantities of output at different combinations of inputs. This is like an isopont. This is the isopont curve for 36 units. 36 units of output. Q equals 36. Can we have another isopont for, let's say, 28 units of output? Yes. So when we look at 28 in this table, we have different locations where we observe 28. This is one. This is another one. This is another one. This is another one. So by combining these, we have another isopont curve. We have another isopont curve for Q equals 28. For 12, yes, we have different locations where we see 12. we can combine them using a smooth curve like this. Do we have another options? For the same, 40 is also there. 40, 40. Likewise, we have different isopods. So a combination of isopods is called isopod mesh. Combination of isopods is called an isopod mesh. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 isopod curves in this map. So what is the general observation you have? This is 0. Both capital and label are 0. When an isopod lies, when an isopod curve lies far away from the origin, origin means where both capital and label are 0. When an isopod curve lies far away from the origin, it represents a higher output level. You can see the isopod curve for 12 units of output is closer to the origin. Next we have 28. Next we have 36. Next we have 40. So likewise, when an isopod curve lies far away from the origin, those higher isopods represent higher output levels. When an isopod curve is closer to the origin, such an isopod curve represents a lower output level. So if we can have another isopod curve somewhere here. Isopod curve somewhere here. It will represent an output level lower than 12. It will represent an output level lower than 12. So that is how we can interpret long-run production curves. Long-run production curves are represented by isopod curves. So the definition for an isopod curve is isopod curve is a curve. Isopod curve is a curve that combines different combinations of two inputs that generate the same level of output. We learned a base isopod. Now we have discharged the marginal rating of technical substitution. This is the slope of an isopod. The slope of an isopod is technically called marginal rate of technical substitution. Let's see what is it. Slope of an isopont is called marginal rate of technical substitution. So in abbreviation it is MRTS. MRTS. If we draw labor on the horizontal axis and capital on the vertical axis, this is marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. Labor for capital. If we draw capital labor input on the horizontal axis and capital on the vertical axis, it is marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. Marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. If we change the positions, capital here, labor here, then it should be marginal rate of technical substitution of capital for labor. Capital for labor. But typical, usual settings in textbooks, we use this method where we put labor on the horizontal axis and capital on the vertical axis, and this should be marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. So this is the usual way we identify marginal rate of technical substitution. Marginal rate of technical substitution of capital, of labor. Substitution of labor. That means we substitute labor. That means we increase labor input. Doing substitution means we increase something. We substitute something instead of one thing. Labor is the labor is the thing we substitute. So labor input increase. Marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. For capital means we reduce capital. We reduce capital. We substitute labor instead of capital. That means we increase labor while decreasing capital. That is the idea behind this term, marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. It means we increase labor input. We substitute labor input instead of capital. We decrease capital input. So this is the isopont map. Usual isopont curve is labor, capital. It's convex to the origin. It's convex to the origin. An isopont curve is convex to origin. Convex to the origin. This part, this part, this part. We ignore these parts. We ignore these parts. We will later discuss why do we ignore these parts. We consider only this convex to the origin part. Origin is this. It is convex to the origin. We ignore these concave parts. The increasing parts. We ignore these increasing parts. For the moment, you should understand that the usual shape of an isopont curve is convex to the origin. It is convex to the origin, at the same time it is downward sloping. It is convex to the origin, at the same time it is downward sloping. Since it is downward sloping, the slope is negative. What is the slope of an isocon curve? Marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. So marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital is negative. The slope is negative. The technical term we give for the slope is marginal rate of technical substitution. So it is negative. So what is the slope of this isocon curve? The change between 2 points. Is A level, K1, L1, L2, K2. This is point A, this is point B. The firm assume that this isocon curve represents 40 units of output. This isocon curve represents 40 units of output. And the firm moves from point A to B. Both point A and B produce Q equals 40. Q equals 40. Since both points produce the same amount of output, they are kind of indifferent between these two combinations. They can produce either at A or B. They can produce 40 units of output either at A or point B. Both point A and B will produce 40 units. So assume since the firm is indifferent between point A and B, from point A to point B, firm moves its production. Firm shifts its production. As a result, firm has to cut down its capital input. At the same time, firm has to increase its labor input. So, capital input is decreased, is negative. Labor input is increased, is positive. So by dividing this change in capital by the positive change in labor, we can calculate marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. Labor for capital. This is what is substitution. So what is sacrifice? This is what is substituted. So the slope simply measures what is sacrificed divided by what is substituted. The sacrificed amount is decreased K. Substituted amount is increased L. So we can measure marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital by dividing change in K, which is negative, by change in L, which is positive. So a negative value divided by positive value, this will always take a negative value. So what is the formula to calculate marginal rate of technical substitution? Delta K over delta L. When the curve moves down along the curve, you see, firm is sacrificing capital and substituting labor. Firm is sacrificing capital and substituting labor. So to find the slope, we divide what is sacrificed by what is substituted. Change in capital is what is sacrificed, change in labor is what is substituted. So we divide change in capital by change in labor to find the slope. This is the slope. So change in capital divided by change in labor is the slope. So that is marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. It is negative because change in capital is always negative because it's a decline. Change in labor is always positive because it's an increase. So a negative value divided by a positive value, the result is negative always. So MRTS for L of L for K is always negative. We also can measure marginal rate of technical substitution in an alternative way. That is, marginal product of labor divided by marginal product of capital. We can alternatively measure the slope of an isocon curve, which is marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital in this way. This is similar to this. Marginal rate of technical substitution of L for K can be calculated in this way or in that way. Delta K over delta L or MPL over MPK. Let's see how it happens. So I am referring to the same isocon curve. It moves its production from point A to B. At point A, firm can produce 40 units. At point B, also firm can produce 40 units. So as a result of this movement, is there any change in output? change in output? No, change in output is 0. Here change in capital is delta K. Here change in labor is delta L. So before talking about this picture, I want to recall your knowledge on marginal product. Marginal product of labor, how to calculate? What is the formula to calculate marginal product of labor? That is change in output divided by change in L. How to calculate marginal product of labor capital? That is change in output divided by change in K. So with these original formulas, we can rearrange them so that delta Q will be equal to MPL multiplied by change in L. Am I correct? I just introduced cross multiplication. MPL into delta L equals delta Q. I do the same thing here also. I apply cross multiplication. Then delta Q equals MPK into delta K. MPK into delta K. So here you observe capital decrease. Capital decrease. As a result of this decrease in capital, what is the change in output? What is the change in output? It is this. Change in output due to this fall in capital is this. We can measure it by multiplying NPK by delta K. Delta K is negative. Here you observe capital input increase. As a result of this increase in labor input is increased. As a result of this increase in labor, what is the change in now? What is the change in now? We can measure it using this formula. Change in output due to increase in labor. Increase in labor. So from one hand, capital input decreases and the change in output is this much. On the other hand, labor input increases. As a result of that, change in output is this much. On one hand, labor input, capital input decreases. As a result, output changes this much. On the other hand, labor input increases and output changes by this much. And also we understood that because of this movement, there is no change in output. There is no change in output. So the net effect of this increase in labor and this decrease in capital should be 0. So that means this increase in output and this increase in output due to increase in labor and this decrease in output due to decrease in capital should be the same. Increase, decrease, and then they cancel out, and the net effect will be 0. These two values should be the same. Then only the net effect of output, the net effect on output will be 0. So let's equate these two. MPL multiplied by delta L equals NPK into delta K. Let's take similar components, similar terms to the same side. So let's take MPL values to the same side. So MP values to the same side. So I bring MPK to the left side. For that, I have to divide both sides by MPK. Divide both sides by MPK. Then we have MPL over MPK into delta L equals delta K. This MPK to MPK gets cancelled out. Then let's bring this delta L to the right hand side. We have to divide both sides by delta L. Then on the left hand side, we have MPL divided by MPK divided by MPL. Sorry, MPL divided by MPK. Equals delta K over delta L. Do you see the same formula? We measured marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital using this formula, delta K over delta L. It is equal to MPL over MPK. That is why I said before that we can measure the slope of an isopont in two ways. One way is delta K over delta L. The other way is MPL over MPK. Clear? We are not asking this technical derivation in the final exam. You should understand, you should memorize this formula only. We can measure the slope of an isopont using in two ways. One way is delta K over delta L. The other way is MPL over MPK. These formulas are true only when we put labor on the horizontal axis and capital on the vertical axis. If we change the two inputs, let's say L here and K here, we have to change the notations as well. If we put L here and K here, then it should be delta L over delta K. And this should be MPK over MPL. These formulas are true only when we have labor on the horizontal axis and capital on the vertical axis. That should be, in that case, you should be careful. Okay, that is about the slope of an isopont. Clear? Anything you want to clarify? Okay. Slope of an isopont curve. The absolute value of the slope of an isopont curve is technical rate of marginal rate of technical substitution. Yes. Slope is always negative. Slope of an isopont curve is always negative. It's always negative. The absolute value, without considering the negative sign, that is marginal rate of technical substitution. Absolute value means without considering the sign. of the value. When we express the value without considering its sign, then it's called the absolute value. If the slope of an isocont is -5, its absolute value is 5. Usually we write absolute values within these two lines. If it is an absolute value, we denote it like this. So the absolute value of the slope is marginal rate of technical substitution. We always express marginal rate of technical substitution in absolute value. That means in simple numbers, in positive numbers, 5, 3, 2.1.5, 0.7, likewise. Without mentioning the sign, we write the numbers. So marginal rate of technical substitution. With that, if we are expressing marginal rate of technical substitution, don't write minus values. Don't write minus signs. Just mention there without minus sign, because marginal rate of technical substitution is the absolute value of the slope. Yes, of course, slope is always negative. Slope is always negative. We call the slope marginal rate of technical substitution, but we express marginal rate of technical substitution without the negative sign. We express marginal rate of technical substitution as an absolute value. So don't write negative signs with marginal rate of technical substitution, but it implies, you should keep in mind that always marginal rate of technical substitution is negative. But when we write the values, we don't mention the negative sign. The marginal rate of technical substitution we can measure as delta K over delta L equals MPL over MPK. Marginal rate of technical substitution between N and R point is 2.5. Yes, we have given a numerical example. The same thing we did before with some numerical values. So earlier we discussed about a movement between A and B. Here it's a movement from point N to point R. So change in K is how much? From 4 to, let's say, 1.5. 1.5. From 4 to 1.5, what is the difference? It has decreased by 2.5. And here, what is the change in labor? Change in labor is 1. From 1 unit to 2 units, change in labor is 1. Then what is the value? Minus 2.5. The slope is the slope of isocont between point N and R. The slope of this isocont between point N and R is 2.5. Then what is the marginal rate of technical substitution? Marginal rate of technical substitution of L for K is 2.5. 2.5. We write it without the minus sign. We write it without the minus sign. We can't use this approach, MPL over MPK, because this graph does not provide MPL and MPK values. We can't follow this approach to find the slope. We have to rely on this approach instead. We don't see MPL and MPK values in this case. But after calculating MRTS using this approach, MPA low MPK should be 2.5. Okay. Earlier I told you that we are considering the portions of isopods which are convex to the origin, which are downward sloping and convex to the origin. We ignore the upward portions of isopods. We are ignoring these upward slope portions of isopods. We don't consider them. We don't consider these upward slope portions of isopods in our analysis. Why is that? Why is that? They are not, they don't belong to economic region of production. They don't belong to economic region of production. Economic region of production should comprise of portions of isopods, which are downward sloping. So we ignore upward sloping portions of isopods which don't belong to the economic region of production. Economic region of production comprises of the portions of isopods which are downward sloping. In upward portions of isopods, let's say this is an upward portion of isopod. L and K. Upward sloping. To move from one point, let's say this is point Q and this is point R. To move from one point to another, let's say this isopod produces Q equals 40. Okay. The firm can produce 40 units of output both at point Q and point R. If the firm moves from point Q to R, the firm moves from point Q to R, what happens? Firm has to increase both capital and labor. Firm has to increase both capital and labor, which is not economical for the firm. It is not economically good for the firm. In downward sloping portions of isopods, when moving from one point to another, one input should be decreased and the other input should be increased. It is fine. But here what happens is, to move from one point to another, both inputs should be increased. So if you are a producer, do you operate in upward sloping portions of isopods? No, you will not operate on upward sloping portions of isopods. A rational producer will operate only on downward sloping portions of isopods, because when operating on upward sloping portions of isopods, both inputs have to be increased at the same time to move from one point to the next. In downward sloping portions, a producer can move from one point to another by decreasing one input and while increasing the other input. So rational producers will not operate in upward sloping portions. That's why they are not parts of economic region of production. Economic region of production is where rational producers will consider. Economic region of production represents the portions of ice cone which are downward sloping and which are considered by rational producers. Firms will only use combinations of two inputs that are within the economic region of production. Economic region of production is separated using ridge lines. So these are ridge lines. To separate economic region of production from upward slope parts of isocones, we draw ridge lines. This is the upper ridge line. This is the upper ridge line. This is the lower ridge line. The upper ridge line is drawn by combining the points. Where marginal product of capital is 0. What is the slope of an isocone? Marginal rate of technical substitution of L for K. We can measure it by dividing delta K over delta L, or else MPL over MPK. We draw the upper ridge line by combining the points where marginal product of capital is 0. Where marginal product of capital is 0. So marginal product of capital will be 0 at this point, at this point, at this point, and at this point. Marginal product of capital is 0. Then what happens to the slope of isocone curve? What happens to marginal rate of technical substitution? When MPK is 0, whatever the value of MPL, it doesn't matter. MRTS will be infinite. MRTS will be infinite. Any value for MPL divided by 0, the result is infinity, infinite. So the slope, I explained earlier that we draw the upper ridge line. By combining the points where MPK is 0. We draw the upper ridge line by combining the points where MPK is 0. In other words, we draw the upper ridge line. We draw the upper ridge line where the slope of the isocon curve is infinite. The same thing in different ways. We draw the upper ridge line where MPK is 0. At those points, the slope of isocon will be infinite. To find the points where the slope of isocont is infinite, we can draw vertical tangent lines to the isocont curves. We can draw vertical tangent lines to each isocont. So these are those isoconts. And these tangency points will be the points where slope of isocont is infinite. That will be the points where MPK is 0. You should understand that for any vertical line, the slope is infinite. For any curve which is horizontal, the slope is 0. The slope of this curve is 0. This curve is infinite. So this tangential line these tangential lines have infinite slope. That means at these points, marginal rate of technical substitution will be infinite. And those are the points where MPK is 0. When MPK is 0, marginal rate of technical substitution becomes infinite. Because any value for MPL divided by MPK, the result is infinite. Okay, let's think about lower ridge line. We draw the lower ridge line by combining the points where MPL is 0. Marginal product of labor is 0. 0 divided by any value of MPK. What is the answer? 0. So we draw the upper ridge line, lower ridge line by combining the points where MPK is 0. MPL is 0. So when MPL is 0, MRTS will be 0. For that, we draw horizontal tangent lines. Horizontal tangent lines. We draw horizontal tangent lines because these horizontal tangent lines will represent the points. These horizontal tangent lines will represent the points where find the point. MRTS is 0. In other words, MPL is 0. So ridge lines are used to separate economic region of production from other portions of isopods. In economic region of production, isopod portions are downward sloping. We know upward sloping portions of isopods, they don't belong to the economic region of production. To separate economic region of production from upward sloping portions of isopods, what we do is we draw isopods. We have to draw ridge lines. We have to draw two ridge lines. One ridge line is the upper ridge line and the other one is lower ridge line. We draw the upper ridge line by combining the points where marginal rate of technical substitution is infinite. We can find those points by drawing vertical tangent lines. At those points, marginal product of capital is 0. And we draw the lower ridge line by combining the points where the marginal rate of technical substitution is 0. To find those points, we draw horizontal tangent lines. And those are the points where marginal product of labor is 0. Those are the points where marginal product of labor is 0. Within the economic region of production, both marginal product of labor and marginal product of capital will be positive. Within the economic region of production, both MPL and MPK are positive. In this range, marginal product of capital will be negative. And over this range, marginal product of labor will be negative. At these points, marginal product of capital is 0. At these points, marginal product of labor is 0. Beyond the upper ridge line, marginal product of capital is negative. Beyond the lower ridge line, marginal product of labor is negative. Within the ridge lines, that means within the economic region of production, both NPL and NPK values are positive. You don't have to understand why NPK is negative here, NPL is negative here, and NPL and NPK are positive here. You don't have to understand it, just understand in these regions, NPL and NPK values will take these kind of values. How it happens, you don't have to understand. I can explain, but it will take another 20 to 30 minutes. Any questions about economic region of production and how do we separate it from the upward sloping portions of isopods? And why positively sloped isopods are not relevant to a production curve? Okay. In usual cases, in most of the time, isopod curves are convex to the origin. So these are also kind of convex to the origin. Even though this line is straight line, it's convex to the origin. It's convex to the origin. Even though this takes an L shape, it is also convex to the origin. The usual shape, the typical shape of an isopod curve is this. It's convex to the origin. At the same time, slope is declining. Slope is declining. So let's say firm here utilizes 2 units of labor, 3 units of labor, 4 units of labor, 5 units. Firm increases labor input from 2 to 3. As a result, firm has to sacrifice capital input from 10 to 5. What is the slope? -5, 1. Delta K over delta L, -5. This is point A, this is point B. From point A to B, the slope is -5 divided by 1. It's -5. So marginal rate of technical substitution is 5. Marginal rate of technical substitution is 5. Then think about the movement from point B to C. Again, the firm increases labor input by 1 unit. As a result, the firm has to sacrifice capital from 5 to 4. 5 to 4. Then how much is change in capital? Change in capital is -1. Change in labor is 1. So from point B to C, change in capital over change in labor, -1 divided by 1, it's -1. So margin rate of technical substitution is 1. From C to D, again firm increases labor input by 1 unit, but for that, firm has to sacrifice only 0.5 units of capital from 4 to 3.5. So the change in capital is -0.5. Change in labor is 1. So delta K over delta L is -0.5 divided by 1 is -0.5. So the marginal rate of technical substitution is 0.5. You can see when the production point moves down along the curve. When the production point moves down along the curve, what happens to the slope? Slope is declining. Slope is declining. Slope, it is 0, it's 5 here, it's 1 here, and then it's 0.5. You can see slope continuously decline. Slope value continuously decline. In other words, marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital is continuously declining. That is the nature of the slope of an isopond, which is convex to the active and also which looks like this. So this kind of an isopond, this type of an isopond has diminishing marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. It has diminishing marginal rate of technical substitution for L for capital because L and K are imperfect substitutes. They are substitutes. The firm can use capital instead of labor instead of capital, but not perfectly. They are, in this curve, we have diminishing marginal rate of technical substitution because of the nature of the substitutability of labor and capital. Because labor and capital are imperfect substitutes, we have this isopond curve which shows diminishing marginal rate of technical substitution. When capital and labor are perfectly substitutable, the isopond curve will look like this. A straight line which takes the same marginal rate of technical substitution. Marginal rate of technical substitution of L for K in this case will be a constant. The slope doesn't change from point to point, but here the slope changes from point to point. In this case, the slope of isopond does not change from point to point. At every point, the slope will be the same. You can see here can't give exact numbers anyway. If we take the changes of vertical changes and horizontal changes, you see, all have the same slope. All these points have the same slope. The slope doesn't change. It should be 0.5 actually. The whole change in capital and the whole change in labor, 6 divided by 12, the slope is marginal rate of technical substitution is 0.5. The slope is minus 0.5. Marginal rate of technical substitution is 0.5. So what is the idea behind marginal rate of technical substitution? I mean, the general idea, I forgot to mention it, that's why. What is the meaning of marginal rate of technical substitution? Marginal rate of technical substitution says how much of one input should be sacrificed, how much of one input should be sacrificed for one unit increase in the other input, or increase in the other input by 1 unit. You can mention it as like that. How much of one input should be sacrificed for an increase in the other input by 1 unit while maintaining the same level of output. How much of an input should be sacrificed in order to increase the other input by 1 unit while maintaining the same level of output. So that is true for all these types of curves. Okay, that is the general definition for marginal rate of technical substitution. That is the general definition. Okay, so here that rate is the same everywhere, from one point to another, and from that point to the next point, from that point to the next point. Whatever the point, whatever the change in points, the same rate of substitution has to be maintained. The same rate of substitution has to be maintained. But in this case, the substituting amount, the amount sacrifices decreases. The amount sacrifices decreases. The amount sacrifices for 1 unit increase in the other input decreases in this case. But in this case, the amount sacrifices from capital for 1 unit increase in labor remains the same. They are perfect substitutes. Instead of capital, we can entirely substitute labor. Instead of labor, we can entirely substitute capital. So they are perfect substitutes. To take a real world example, let's say sugar, the small cubes, usually we call sugar in small cubes, and sugar syrup. You are producing cake. So sugar is an input. So you can use either sugar cubes or sugar syrup. Both are perfect substitutes. So to give an example for this case, where the inputs are not perfectly substitutes, let's say you are producing you are producing milkshake. Electricity. You are producing something, let's say a garment item, You can utilize permanent employees, or you can hire some contract basis employees. They are substitutable but not perfect. Permanent employees may be well trained and well experienced, but employees on contract basis may not have such experience, that much of experience and that much of talent. So both are substitutable but not perfect. So in that case, the isocon curve will be downward sloping and also the slope will decrease along the curve when it moves down. Okay, those are two examples for the two cases. And in this case, what happens is the two inputs are perfect complements. The two inputs are perfect complements. The production will happen only at these corners. Production will happen only at these corners. Production will not happen on these vertical and horizontal lines. To produce one unit, there is a particular ratio at which the two inputs should be combined. For example, let's think about a pharmaceutical company, produce a kind of a medicine. They have to combine chemical 1 and chemical 2. Chemical 1 is mandatory. Chemical 2 is also mandatory to produce the medicine. So in that case, let's say the firm should combine 2 units of chemical 1 and 1 unit of chemical 2 to produce 1 tablet. To produce 2 tablets, the firm should combine 4 units of chemical 1 and 2 units of chemical 2. To produce 3 units of tablets, the firm should combine 6 units of chemical 1 and 3 units of chemical 2. Likewise, to produce a single unit of output, both inputs are required. Both inputs are required, and to increase the output, the same ratio between input 1 and input 2 should be maintained. Here to produce 1 unit of output, what is the ratio between chemical 1 and chemical 2? 2 to 1. To produce 2 units of output, 2 units of tablets, how much of chemical 1 should be required? 4. Chemical 1, 2. So what is the ratio? 4 to 2. 4 to 2. Again, we can simplify it to the ratio 2 to 1. 2 to 1. Here the ratio is 2 to 1. Here also the ratio is 2 to 1. Here also the ratio is 2 to 1. So the same ratio between the two inputs has to be maintained at different levels of inputs, different levels of outputs. let's say this is chemical A, this is chemical B. To produce 1 unit of tablet, the firm should utilize 1 unit of A and 2 units of B. The ratio is 2 to 1. To produce 2 units of tablets, the firm should utilize 2 units of A and 4 units of B. Again, the ratio is 2 to 1. To produce 3 units of tablets, the firm should utilize 3 units of A and 6 units of B. Again, the ratio is 2 to 1. The production will happen only at these corners, not at these vertical and horizontal lines. For example, why production doesn't happen on these vertical lines? Take an example. The firm should produce 2 units of tablets. They can combine 4 units of chemical B and 2 units of chemical A. To produce 2 units of tablets, the firm can combine 4 units of chemicals B and 2 units of chemical A. Is it meaningful to produce here? Is it meaningful to produce here by combining 2 units of A and 5 units of B? It's not meaningful because it's a resource waste. It's a cost waste because rather than combining 5 units of B and 2 units of A, they can produce 2 units of tablets by combining 4 units of B and 2 units of A. So why does this firm utilize an extra unit to produce 2 if they can produce it with only 4 units of B? Why do they go for 5 units of B? It doesn't meaningful. It's not meaningful. So that's why production does not happen on these vertical lines. The same logic can be applied to explain why production doesn't happen on these horizontal lines. For example, let's assume we want to produce 1 unit of tablet and we can produce it by combining 2 units of chemical B and 1 unit of chemical A. If the firm decides to combine 6 units of A and 2 units of B to produce 1 unit of tablet, it's also a cost waste. It also will waste cost because it doesn't require the firm to use 6 units of A. Rather than utilizing 6 units of chemical A, they can produce 1 unit of tablet with only 1 unit of chemical A by combining it with 2 units of B. So utilizing 5 units of chemical A, 5 extra units of chemical A is a waste of cost. It's a waste of resources and also it's a waste of cost. No need to utilize 5 extra units to produce 1 unit of tablet. They can do it by just combining 2 units of B and 1 unit of A, rather than going for 6 units of A. That is why production will not happen on these horizontal lines as well. Production will not happen on these vertical lines as well. Production will happen. Cost-effective production will happen only at these corner points. That is about different shapes of isocones. These are different shapes of isocones. Here, the inputs are perfectly substitutable. Here, the inputs are perfect complements. Here, the inputs are imperfect substitutes. Long-run production with two variable input isocost curves. Yes, this is about the production side. Isocons represent the production side. Isocost curves represent the cost side. That is about the cost. As we define isocons, we can define isocost in the same way. So let's try the definition of isocost curve. It combines, an isocost curve combines, different combinations of two inputs that will cost the same amount. Usually, isocost curves take a straight line shape. L here, A here. This is isocost. Takes a downward sloping straight line. So it's a downward sloping straight line. So in production, firm utilizes only two inputs, labor and capital. So total cost has to be incurred in labor and in capital. Total cost has to be incurred on capital and on labor. One part of total cost should go for labor and the rest of total cost should go for capital. So total cost has two components, labor cost and capital cost. Labor cost and capital cost. Cost of labor, cost of capital. Cost of labor is wage rate multiplied by number of labor units utilized. Wage rate multiplied by number of labor units utilized or employed. Cost on capital is R. R stands for cost of capital. Cost of capital. It's also similar to the wage rate. Wage rate is the unit of payment for 1 unit of labor. Unit of the amount of payment for 1 unit of labor. So R is also a similar concept. Amount of rupees paid for 1 unit of capital. Amount of rupee paid for 1 unit of capital. It is the cost of capital. The price of capital. Cost or price. Price of capital. Unit price. Unit price. Price per unit. Unit price of capital multiplied by number of capital units employed. That is the total cost on the cost on capital. The cost on capital. cost on capital. So one part of total cost is spent on labor. We calculate it by multiplying W by number of labor units employed, and the rest of the total cost is spent on capital. So that part is calculated by multiplying unit price of capital multiplied by number of capital units employed. So we can rearrange this formula in this way. We make K as the subject. We make K as the subject because K is the variable which is on the horizontal axis, which is on the vertical axis. K is the variable which is on the vertical axis. Therefore, we derive this expression with K as the subject. With K as the subject. So by doing some modification to this expression, we can derive this. We can bring this WL to the left, P minus WL. So on the right hand side, we have R into K. And then we can divide both sides by R. Then this R to R gets cancelled out. Then what will remain is K equals P over R minus W over R into L. So this R is common for both C and WL. I write them separately as separate fractions. C over R minus W over R into L. We do only very simple modification to this original expression to derive this. So number of capital units, this is number of capital units. Purchase equals total cost divided by price of capital minus W over R into L. So this W over R minus W over R is the slope of isocost curve. Minus W over R is the slope of isocost curve. It is minus because this curve is negatively sloped. That is the slope. And this C over R is the vertical intercept. The value at this point. Value at this point. The vertical intercept. Or simply the intercept. Is C over R. That is the value of K. That is the value of K. C over R is the value of K when L is 0. Amount of K when L is 0. When we substitute 0 for L, this whole part will be 0. Then K will be equal to C over R. When we substitute 0 for L, this whole part W over R into L will be 0. Any value multiplied by 0, the whole value becomes 0. Then what we left is C over R. That C over R is the amount of capital when labor is 0. When labor amount is 0, capital input will be this much, which is the vertical intercept and which is computed as C over R. Okay, that is the mathematical expression for the total, the isocost curve. This is total cost. This is an expression for the isocost curve with an intercept and with the slope. What is the intercept? C over R is the intercept. What is the slope? Minus W over R is the slope. Then we talk about these two things. The optimum level of labor and optimum level of capital that maximizes profits. That is what now we are going to study. It happens under the condition of marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital should be equal to W over R. The optimum combination of labor and capital. The optimum combination of labor and capital. Labor and capital. That means L star and A star is determined under this condition. Under this condition. What is MRTS? Slope of isocont. What is W over R? Slope of isocost. The optimum combination of labor and capital will be determined when the slope of isocont and the slope of isocost are the same. The optimum combination of labor and capital will be determined where the slope of isocost, the slope of isocont and the slope of isocost are the same. If the slope of two curves are the same, what does it mean? If the slope values of two curves are the same, what does it mean? At that point, the two curves are tangent. If the slope values of two curves, are the same, it implies that at that point, the two curves are tangent. So, marginal rate of technical substitution equals to W over R. We call it input price ratio. W over R is input price ratio. Marginal rate of technical substitution is equal to the input price ratio when this condition is satisfied, when isocont curve and isocost curve are tangent. When they are tangent, this condition is satisfied. In other words, when these two curves are tangent, we decide the optimum combination of labor and capital. The optimum combination of labor and capital is decided when isocont and isopost curves are tangent to each other. When they are tangent to each other. At that tangency point, marginal rate of technical substitution will be equal to the input price ratio. It is an isocon from the economic region of production. This is an isopos. And the two curves are tangent to each other at the point. They are tangent. They are touching each other only at one single point. They are touching each other at one single point, and that point is the tangency point. They should touch each other, okay? Diagram is not that much closer. Now it's tangent. The tangency point should be a unique point, okay? In my case, now it's touching several points, but it should not be the case. Tangency point, if I go the tangency point should like this. So at this point, slope of isocon equals slope of isopos. Slope of isocon is marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital. Slope of isopos is input price ratio. Which is W over R. And at that point, we find L star and K star. Find L star and K star at these are the optimum combinations of labor and capital. Optimum combinations of labor and capital. to produce, let's say, 100 units of output, produce 100 units of output, the firm may need to combine 20 units of capital and 10 units of labor. Let's say the firm wants to increase its output to 150. Can this firm produce with this much of cost? Let's say this isocost curve represents a cost of 1,000. Can this firm produce 150 units of output with 1,000 rupees of cost? No, it's not possible. To produce this much of the higher output, the firm has to incur higher cost. Higher cost. So IC, this is IC1, IC2 may represent, let's say, 2,000 rupees. So to produce 150 units of output, this point is the optimum combination, and it will utilize, let's say, 30 units of capital and 20 units of labor. Again, let's say the firm wants to produce an output level of 50. An output level of 50. Does this firm have to incur a cost of 1,000 rupees to produce 50 rupees? No, they can do it with a lesser amount of cost. So they may want to incur, let's say, only 750 rupees. So the optimum combination is here, and at that point, the firm utilizes 5 units of labor and 15 units of capital. 15 units of capital. Likewise, different levels of outputs will need different levels of cost, and those combinations of inputs and costs will derive different combinations of optimum input combinations. So when the firm produces 50 units of output, the optimum combination is 15K units and 5L units. When the firm produces 100 units of output, the optimum combination will be 20K units and 10L units. When the firm produces 150 units of output, optimum combination will be 30K units and 20L units. So when we combine these optimum input combinations at different levels of output, this path is called the expansion path. Expansion path. Expansion path shows how a firm can expand its production. How the firm can expand its production level. When a firm moves upward along this curve, the firm expands its production in the long run. So all these concepts are related to the long run. Expansion path is defined as the set of combinations of capital and labor that meet efficiency condition of MPL over W equals MPK over R. This is the same thing. This is not new. This is the same thing. Marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital equals input price ratio. Marginal rate of technical substitution is delta K over delta L, or in other words, MPL over MPK. And it should be equal to W over R. So when we consider this condition, MPL over MPK equals W over R, this is just a simple modification to this original equation. MPL over MPK equals W over R. We use cross multiplication. Then it will be MPL into R equals MPK into W. Then I bring W to the left side. Then it will be MPL divided by W. Then I bring R to the right hand side. It will be MPK divided by R. So this condition is derived from the basic equilibrium condition. The basic equilibrium condition is marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital equals input price ratio. Marginal rate of technical substitution of labor for capital is MPL over MPK. Input price ratio is W over R. So at the optimum combination, this condition should be satisfied. MPL over MPK equals W over R. So I use cross multiplication to this condition. In this condition, then it becomes MPL equals MPL into R equals MPK into W. By taking W to the left hand side and by taking R to the right hand side, I derive this expression. MPL over W equals MPK over R. So at optimum combination of two inputs, at the optimum combination of labor and capital, this condition should be satisfied. Similarly, the same condition can be expressed as this. The same condition but in different ways. The same thing, they are equal. The same condition but in different ways. Actually, this expression is more meaningful. This expression is more meaningful. What does it mean? Additional output of labor, per unit of per rupee of labor cost. Additional output that can be produced by spending. Additional output that can be produced by spending one additional rupee on labor. Additional output that can be produced by spending one additional rupee on labor should be equal to additional output that can be generated, by spending one additional rupee on capital. So at the optimum combination of inputs, additional output generated by spending one additional rupee on each input should be the same. Additional output generated by spending one additional rupee on each input should be the same. That is the idea behind this new condition. New but the same as before. This is more economic meaningful, but this is more meaningful as I explained earlier. So this is rupees spent on labor, this is rupees spent on capital. These are additional inputs, additional outputs. Additional output produced by one additional rupee on labor should be equal to additional output produced by spending one additional rupee on capital. It is much meaningful. So expansion path is defined as the set of combinations. It combines different input combinations, different optimum input combinations. It combines different optimum input combinations that produce different output levels. Okay. This combination, take one combination. We can interpret this combination, the optimum combination, in different ways. At this point, output is maximum. Output is maximized under the given cost. Under the given cost. Also, at the same point,